You are listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast with Maggie Green, episode number 382.
Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast, a podcast that celebrates cookbook readers, buyers, collectors, writers, and clubs. And now your host, cookbook author, culinary dietitian, and cookbook writing coach, Maggie Green.
Hi, everybody. Happy New Year. Welcome back to another episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. Hope everybody's having a wonderful new year, no matter when you are tuning in. And I hope you had a terrific holiday season and that you are enjoying the sights, sounds, smells, and all of the wonderful things that the holiday season can bring. Thank you for being here with us today. And I am excited to bring you an interview with Jenn Huber. Jenn is a fellow registered dietitian, naturopath doctor, and intuitive eating counselor. She is on a mission to help women thrive in midlife and navigate the physical and emotional changes of menopause. In her new book, Eat to Thrive During Menopause, Jenn brings to life a groundbreaking approach to help women navigate symptoms caused by perimenopause and menopause. And in her book, which is grounded in intuitive eating and the science of nutrition, she provides an empathetic framework that is going to guide all women to a way of eating that supports their body, their energy, and overall well-being. Today on the show, we talk about the 5 key ingredients that Jenn embraces to help you feel better and to provide you with recipes that are delicious, surprisingly rich, and full of all the things that you need to manage the symptoms of menopause. So this is a show for the new year because we often start to think about how we're eating as the new year begins. And because of the demographics of this show, I thought that this would be something that would be of interest to most of you who are listening. So I hope that you enjoy today's interview with Jenn Huber. Hi, Jenn. Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Maggie.
Yes, very excited that you're here. Cannot wait to talk all about your beautiful new book and your community. But before we get started, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks. So I describe myself as a Canadian in clogs because I'm a Canadian living in the Netherlands, but I'm also a registered dietitian and naturopathic doctor, intuitive eating counselor. And really, I've spent the last, part of my career, let's say 10 years or so, really focused on helping women in midlife through that menopause transition, which includes perimenopause, menopause, and everything after. So that's really been kind of the focus of my work, even though I've been in practice for 25 years. I think I found my home for the rest of my career.
Great. That's great. And you actually got into this work and into the book that you wrote, Eating to Thrive During Menopause, as a result of a personal journey you went on. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I'm 48 now. I'll be 49 in a few months. But just over 10 years ago, I guess 11 years ago now, I was in my mid to late 30s and I found myself in perimenopause. And it came as a surprise to me because I was 37. I had 3 young kids. It was not on my radar, but I was having a lot of symptoms that were very clearly related to this reproductive stage that half the planet will go through eventually. Yeah, I was having night sweats and I was experiencing a lot of anxiety and my sleep was changing and my mood was changing. But everyone was, saying, oh, it's because you're so busy and you have kids and you're running a practice. And I also was thinking that it was just because there was a lot of life happening around me. But it really wasn't until the hot flashes started and things started to go sideways with my cycles that it really kind of came together and, oh, okay, actually, this is perimenopause. And so I've been fully menopausal, so I haven't had any cycles since I was 44. So I'm entering my 4th year of being in postmenopause now. But, like everyone else, when I figured it out and my doctor, who was great, figured it out. I wanted to try hormone therapy and I did. And unfortunately was one of those people that is hormone sensitive and didn't feel better on it. I love the journey for other people. I think it is safe. And I say that a lot in all my work. Just because it didn't work for me doesn't mean I want people to think it's not going to work for them. But what I really came away with was this strengthened belief that it's not the only way either. And that's really what I like people to know is that even if hormone therapy helps you with many things, it isn't going to be the only thing that you need to have on your kind of menopause menu, so to speak.
Yeah. And this prompted you to actually dive into nutrition even more. You were a dietitian prior to that, correct?
Yes.
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 Yeah. And sometimes as dietitians, we think, well, what else would I really have to learn about food and nutrition? But it sounds to me like this took you even further into nutrition, specifically during menopause.
Yeah, exactly. Because, when you are used to looking into research, generally you're looking for something specific. You either have a client population, patient population, or you have you have a question. And so when I started to look at what research has been done on patterns of eating and menopausal symptoms, patterns of eating and menopausal health, and then specifically looking at things like hot flashes and night sweats, I was pleasantly surprised to see that this was not a new area of research, that we actually had, research going back to the 90s, looked at certain things like soy foods in particular. So when I was reading about that and learning about that and then eventually trying it myself, I was shocked at how well it worked for me. And I say shocked because when you read the research, and even when I'm trying to communicate this, it's like, okay, you have to have, a couple servings a day, and it might take up to 12 weeks, but it really was a couple of weeks for me. And that's, not uncommon either, that when I started to include soy milk more regularly, when I started playing around with tofu, when I started keeping edamame in my freezer and just finding ways to regularly include those, my hot flashes and my night sweats essentially disappeared.
So, and that's related to the soy that you ate. We're going to talk
Exactly.
about the 5 key things that you feel like are part of your framework, but it's fascinating that you saw such a dramatic improvement in the night sweats and the hot flashes just because of the addition of soy milk, tofu, edamame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean,
I'd love to paint a picture of the after also related to what changed, because I think sometimes painting this picture of a perhaps better or brighter future really helps people to imagine what's possible for them also.
Oh, that's great. I think we normalize a lot of symptoms, especially those that we consider normal, right? So if we think about pregnancy, and somebody who's experiencing morning sickness, we say, oh yeah, that's normal. But that doesn't really make it any better for the person who's experiencing it, right? Yes, it does get better with time and we can tell them our experience, but it doesn't help us to minimize what they're experiencing. And I think that what we see in the research is that a lot of women in a healthcare setting are being told by their healthcare providers, oh, well, it's just part of this stage of life. But anybody who has experienced hot flashes and night sweats will tell you they are not fun. They disrupt your sleep. They disrupt your train of thought. It can feel like you're about to have a heart attack. A lot of people will have a lot of anxiety before, during, and after. It really throws you off your game. And these are the most common symptoms. 75% or more of women going through the transition will experience hot flashes at some point, and sometimes for a long time. So the value, and really, I think the change that happens when we acknowledge that, yes, it is normal. No, you're not dying, and that's great news, but that doesn't mean you have to suffer, because if you can find a way to reduce your hot flashes and sleep better because you're having fewer night sweats, you will feel better. You will have more energy. You will feel like you're getting a part of your life back, because that's really what it felt like for me.
Yeah.
When I went from waking up 3 to 4 times a night, with my skin burning, I was never one of those people that would wake up with the sheets drenched, but I woke up feeling like I had a sun lamp on me. And it was just, I couldn't get the covers off me fast enough. And it was enough that it would take me an hour to get back to sleep. And, that's not fun. There's
No.
nothing enjoyable about that process.
Right, right. And it is disruptive. I think it's not sleeping well, it totally affects the rest of our day.
Absolutely.
And when it has a compound effect, I think, over time. So you wanted to write this book, and we're going to talk about these 5 things. But I think one thing you wanted to make a point of from based on our conversation is that you wanted to blend the evidence-based nutrition with intuitive eating in a way that empowers people to make a change, and that this is not a diet book.
Yes, this is not a diet book. And, we've talked about my perimenopausal journey, but there was also another journey that was kind of happening in parallel. And that is that, like many people, I grew up entrenched in diet culture. Many dietitians as well are entrenched in diet culture. We have research to say that dietetic students are at higher risk of disordered eating. And I was definitely in that population of people. And so I had spent 25 years on and off a diet. And so when menopause crash landed, one of the symptoms that I was experiencing were the body changes that we hear so much about. And when I went looking for information, there really was just a lot of diet advice. And that was not good for me individually. But what I realized was that there really isn't anything out there that is, let's call it, weight neutral. And I didn't even really know what that word was, but I just knew deep inside me that I did not want another diet. And so thankfully, I came across the work of Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch and the intuitive eating framework. And so that kind of journey was happening in parallel. So when I became, I guess you could say, focused on menopause nutrition, I really wanted to make something accessible that was in that weight neutral intuitive eating space, that was focused on the nutrition, focused on the behaviors around nutrition, and less about the outcomes that we would find on a scale.
Correct.
And thinking about life after menopause, because menopause may steal the spotlight, but really menopause is just one day. And if we're lucky, we're going to spend 30 to 40% of our life in post-menopause. And there's so much that nutrition can do for us in that phase.
Right. And it can really be a time where it's a phase of our life that we're not facing a lot of symptoms that really negatively impact our day-to-day life. So let's talk about your framework, 5 key ingredients. And you talk about this in the book. It shaped the book. But first of all, how did you decide on 5 key ingredients?
Well, and one of the nice things about being in practice and work, doing this work before I wrote the book was that it was a framework that I had tested essentially. And it came out of wanting to give people some guidance around the concept of gentle nutrition. And so for people who may not be familiar with intuitive eating, gentle nutrition is one of the principles. And it is essentially how we talk about food, because there are elements of nutrition science that can help us to live longer, better, healthier lives. Or, there's value to talking about nutrition without talking about diets. But it's a difficult concept to illustrate. And a lot of the intuitive eating information that's out there isn't geared towards people who are in this stage of life, who might be experiencing high cholesterol, who might be experiencing changes in their health, where that conversation about nutrition needs to come back to the table. So when I started looking at, okay, how can I give people like wayfinders? How can I give them a beacon that says, okay, if this food is the key ingredient protein, for example, then there's also going to be some overlap with some other nutrition. Generally, foods that are high in protein are also good sources of zinc. They often have magnesium. Similarly with calcium-rich foods, we're often going to find those in foods that also have magnesium, that have other micronutrients that support bone health. So I wanted to have these umbrella groups of key ingredients that could help people in making decisions that would support their health without overemphasizing or making the nutritionism the most important part of it. So that's really how the framework came about.
Yeah. And it sounds to me like you're focused on a forward-facing approach, a toward approach, rather than an approach where we're talking about things to avoid.
Absolutely. Nutrition by tradition, every day, all day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that when we think about it that way, it makes it easier, rather than thinking of this as a diet, incorporating these 5 ingredients into our are weak, are, are maybe rather than thinking about it like having to have all of these things every day, but when we're planning what we're going to eat, trying to incorporate them into what we eat and making this something that is sustainable for the rest of our life.
And we don't have to do it perfectly.
Yeah.
So, the way that we eat, and this concept of normal eating is another, concept that I tried to build into this work, is that we might make a meal and eat it for several days, depending on how many people you have in your life. And that's normal eating. I don't think it fits in most of our daily rhythms and routines to be making a different meal every day of the week for every, meal time. And so I like to mention this idea of like a capsule wardrobe, but for your kitchen or for nutrition.
That's great.
And anybody who's not familiar with a clothing capsule wardrobe, you're going to have a couple of tops, a couple bottoms, a couple of accessories, a jacket or two, things that you can mix and match depending on your needs. Now, somebody who lives in the tropics is going to have a very different capsule wardrobe than somebody who lives in northern Canada. And so we all have our own individual needs, climates, access, that kind of thing. But these key ingredients can also be kind of mix and match that way. So if somebody is having a lot of hot flashes, then maybe more of their capsule wardrobe items are going to be focused on soy and phytoestrogens. If cholesterol and heart health or digestive health are their main concern at this point, because it might change in a month or a year, then focusing on foods that are high in fiber. So that's another way that I like to encourage people to use it, is to really think about like which of these should maybe be at the front of your capsule wardrobe so that you see them, you use them, but you also know that they're there.
Yeah. All right. So we've talked about soy, and you mentioned a word that people might not be familiar with. Let's talk about phytoestrogens, because this is ingredient number one.
Yeah. So soy and phytoestrogens. And so phytoestrogens are plant-based estrogen-like compounds. So what that means is that they have the ability to bind to one of our estrogen receptors in a very weak way. So they do not compete with our body's own estrogen in terms of strength or activity. They're not comparable to even a medication or, menopausal hormone therapy. But that is also one of their strengths. So because they can bind to, these estrogen receptors, they can help to the gaps when we're low on estrogen, which is how they help reduce hot flashes. But there's also a lot of evidence that because they take up a binding spot on this receptor, that they're associated with reduced risks of certain cancers, especially those that we associate with estrogen, like breast cancer. So there's quite a bit of research to tell us that these are good foods for us to include, even if we're not experiencing symptoms such as hot flashes.
Yeah. And then I can only imagine in your book, you address this ingredient, soy products, tofu, edamame, things that people can actually now cook in their kitchen with these ingredients. Because we're not talking about taking supplements. We're talking about ingredients as in things we cook with. And that's the cookbook. Exactly. And then things that people can prepare, eat, enjoy.
And the thing about soy is that a lot of people have heard things over the years, and I address all of these myths in the section on soy, but have heard about that it increases the risk of cancer, but it really doesn't, and we have so much research to reassure us about that.
Yeah.
Or they've heard that there are concerns about thyroid health. So I really wanted to give people not only the information that was accurate to help them feel confident, but the recipes are also. The simplicity is a feature. It's not a flaw, because I know that for a lot of people, these are, foods that they have never cooked with. They may not know how to use them. And so I wanted to make these easy, accessible, and, things that people wanted to try because they didn't seem overwhelming.
Right. So when we read the book and I go to the section on soy, you talk about isoflavones. Tell us what that is.
So isoflavones are the type of phytoestrogen that is specific to soy. So there are several groups of phytoestrogens, and the isoflavones we generally find it only in soy, although they are also found in chickpeas. But as I tell people, we don't have any research testing chickpeas against soy for hot flashes, so they're probably the same. I couldn't see why they wouldn't have a similar effect. But to date, we don't have the research to say that they are exactly the same, but they're primarily found in soy foods.
Yeah. And then you have a table that lists the isoflavone content of different soy foods from soybeans at the top, and then tempeh, soy nuts, tofu, edamame, soy milk, and soy yogurt. So,
Yeah.
what's the most surprising thing you found in cooking with soy products that you might want to share?
Well, I think that most people feel overwhelmed when they think about tofu because, especially for those of us who grew up in North America, tofu was not part of our cultural plate. It was not on everybody's meat and potatoes plate. And so a lot of people feel like that it doesn't that it's not an appetizing thing to look at. But I like to think of it as it's like clay that you can mold. And maybe that's not the most appetizing thing to think about, but it really is a strength because you can essentially give it the flavor that you want to give it. You can crumble it, you can blend it, you can fry it, you can really do so much with it. So when I was playing around with different recipes, what I found most surprising was just that when you give something a familiar taste and texture, that can go a long way towards overcoming maybe any hesitations that people have. I did a lot of recipe testing with my kids and my kids' friends, and that was kind of always the thing with tofu, especially that it was like, oh, actually, this tastes a lot different than I thought it would when you're looking at it raw, for example. So I think that's probably the biggest one.
Yeah, I agree about that. And with our supermarkets now in 2025, 2026, all of these things readily available. And
Absolutely.
it's things that we can find easily, keep in our refrigerator or in our pantry and
Or the freezer,
enjoy.
freezing tofu.
Yeah.
And this is another great tip for people. One of the keys to making tofu have the right texture, really, and be able to absorb the flavors that you're cooking it with is to get as much water out as possible. And so usually I just press that because I'm usually buying it fairly fresh and, I'm going to use it that day or the next day. But if you find tofu on sale, you can chuck it in the freezer. And when you take it out of the freezer and thaw it, the water just runs out of it because the freezing process actually breaks the
Squeezes
cells
it
and the
out.
water runs out.
That's
So it's a
fascinating.
really great way to get your tofu as dry as possible, which is a good thing.
Yeah. We've been on a little bit of a tempeh kick here, and I just keep a cake of it in my refrigerator all the time.
Yeah.
And whenever we make a bowl or like we might have some sort of meat like chopped up for the bowl, I always cook the tofu or tempeh, crumble it on the side. I use smoked paprika, a little bit of salt, brown it in some
good.
olive oil, and it's so good.
So good. Yeah.
And so easy. And the
tempeh,
yeah, it's for people that it's new for. It's not slimy. It's just this nice dry cake, but you do have to cook it in order to consume it. Correct? Yeah,
absolutely. You do have to cook it.
Yeah.
And I think that tempeh is a really great alternative for people who maybe do want something that has a little bit more of that meaty texture, because it is a much denser soy product or product compared to tofu, which you can have a range of soft, which is very almost gelatin like, to firm. But yeah, tofu is a great thing. I love it too.
Yeah, great. Okay, let's go to key ingredient number 2.
So protein, which I think most people, I always joke that you have to be living under a rock to not be hearing about protein these days, especially if you're over 40. And, one of my missions is to make menopause nutrition feel easy. Yeah. And so protein is important. We do need a little bit more of it, but we don't need to make it a full-time job. And so most people associate the need for protein with muscle, which it absolutely is involved in. But we also need it because it helps us to feel full. It helps to slow down that digestive process, which has benefits to our metabolic health and blood sugar. We need it to make enzymes and neurotransmitters. So we need protein. It's a macronutrient for a reason. But I like to think of it as we need a main character protein on our plate most of the time. We don't need to be counting, measuring, and tracking. So that's how I teach it is, what does a main character look like? You can have that as one item, like a chicken breast, for example, or you can mix and match these supporting character. So you could have some hummus, some other nuts and seeds, and maybe a bit of yogurt on the side. There's lots of ways that you can mix and match to have that main character protein without feeling like you need to be eating, the equivalent of a chicken breast at every meal.
Right. And I think that protein in particular for nutrition related to hair, related to nails, related to all the things women love, our skin, it's so important. But like you said, we do not have to overdo it. And so you have a nice chart in here also about protein, how much would be in a typical serving, which is a great way to do it because, people are going to eat one chicken breast, not like, so it's great to see it. And it's kind of like goes from highest to lowest, everything from chicken breast to lean beef to pumpkin seeds, eggs, and then whole grain pasta and hemp seeds. So a lot of different examples of ways that we can add and get protein in our diet.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Okay, calcium.
Yeah,
Number
so
3.
calcium, again, I think most people have heard of, especially in relation to bone health. But I do think that there's some misunderstanding about calcium because we know that we reach peak bone mass by the time that we're 30. So for anybody in menopause or approaching that age, that ship has sailed. And so we tend to think of it being more important when we're building bone. And there's been some confusion over the years because calcium supplements have not performed as well as we wanted them to in the research. They don't seem to prevent fractures, which is the end game. But what most people, I think, miss is that our bones are like a bank of calcium. Our heart and our muscles need that calcium every day for contraction and relaxation. And if your heart does not have the calcium it needs, it's going to make a withdrawal from your bones. So if we're eating enough calcium-rich foods during the day, we can reduce the number of withdrawals essentially that are made. So we may not be able to make deposits as efficiently as we could in our 20s and even early 30s, but we can certainly limit the number of withdrawals. And so that is the value of calcium. But there's also some associations with sleep, which is a very common perimenopausal and menopausal symptom, that people who are consuming more calcium-rich foods report better sleep, longer sleep, and for people who are experiencing those painful periods, especially, which is very common in perimenopause, calcium intakes are also associated with fewer cramps. So lots of reasons to include calcium.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. A lot of the foods that I'm seeing on these lists have a lot of crossover. Like I see edamame on the protein list, the calcium list, and the soy list.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that just is amazing to think that there are certain foods that we can eat that would be, they're already ticking the mark for 3 of the key ingredients.
And that's why I say, soy is, really, I would never use the word superfood because I just hate that. I think that puts things on a pedestal and ranks them in a way that doesn't really help us. But if we're looking for nutrient density, if we're looking for bang for our buck, you really can't go wrong with including more soy foods.
Yeah. And it's not limited to just tofu. Like that's why I read that list. There's so many different ingredients that you can use. And soy milk, love to have use
soy milk is such an easy swap too, because if you're using any kind of milk for anything else, and this is a really common question I get is, well, I don't like cow's milk or can't tolerate cow's milk. What is the best alternative? All milks for adults are a beverage. So I don't think anybody needs to overthink what milk they're choosing. But that being said, if we compare the nutrient profile of soy milk to cow's milk, they're quite similar in terms of protein, especially. They're both in the range of 7 to 9 grams, depending on the brand, compared to almond, rice, oat, which are generally less than a gram of protein. So again, when you're looking at nutrient density, soy milk is an easy choice, but it really comes down to what but I find that it's very easy to swap it for pretty much any other kind of milk.
I think so too. I think it's great. Okay. What about number 4 then?
So fiber is the one that I think most adults have heard of or know of. And I always joke that when you're over 40, you're choosing the cereal for the fiber, not the toy. And that is very much true in menopause as well, because fiber intakes are associated with with reductions in a lot of the risks that start to show in our 50s and 60s in particular, when we're well into postmenopause, most of us. And that is mainly related to the risks of heart disease and the increased risks of many cancers, including digestive cancers. But when we look at patterns of eating that are associated with better outcomes, longer life, better quality of life, they almost they generally always include foods or diets or patterns of eating that are high in fiber. So fiber, we get two types. There's soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. And we really need a mix of both. On the heart health side, there's a little bit more emphasis on the soluble fiber because it has that cholesterol lowering, blood sugar balancing effect. It feeds our gut bacteria. But we also need the insoluble fiber, which I call the pipe cleaner, to move things through, which is where we get a lot of the reductions in the cancer risk and colon cancer in particular. So I like to encourage people to enjoy a variety of whole grains. I'm definitely not a fan of low carb diets in particular, mainly because they really out that really easy, delicious, accessible source of fiber, but also, just simple things like fruit. Fruit is portable, and you're almost always going to get at least 3 grams of fiber per serving, which is, one serving of whatever fruit that you're having. But yeah, fiber is one that, and many people, adults, are not getting enough of. Some data is saying that 95% of Americans, for example, are not getting enough fiber.
Yeah. So give us examples of some foods that are high in soluble fiber.
So
and what
oats
that
are my
means,
favorite.
right. And what that means for people when they're thinking about foods that would be high in soluble fiber versus insoluble.
Yeah. And so it's important to note that all foods that contain fiber usually have a combination. I can't think of any food that is only one or the other, but it usually will be dominant in one. And oats are a great example. So whole grain oats contain both soluble and insoluble, but they're a particularly good source of a type of soluble fiber called beta glucan, which is the component that can help to lower cholesterol, and that also helps feed our gut bacteria. Now, I don't know of an easy way that you can tell just by looking at them. I did provide a chart to show people, but my kind of favorites are oats. I call myself the chief defender of oatmeal because I really feel like it's gotten a bad rap. But also things like apples and pears, things that most people, especially in North America, would really have easy access to.
Yeah.
Fruits in general are going to be a great source, but also beans and lentils, which is, part of that plant forward approach that I like teach people. You don't have to be a vegetarian. I'm not, but including even a few servings of plant-based protein, beans, lentils, tofu is another way to just naturally increase your fiber, because a cup of beans will come in at least 12 grams of fiber. So if you're substituting or adding beans to a dish, it's really easy to double your fiber intake.
Yeah, two higher foods in soluble fiber too, avocado and Brussels sprouts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Now, let's talk a little bit, for a minute, if you're willing to, about cholesterol levels. It is not uncommon for women as they reach midlife and they've postmenopausal for them to get their labs checked and notice or be told that their total cholesterol maybe is elevated, their LDL cholesterol might be elevated. Talk a little bit about that in the context of menopause specifically. Is that something that women can expect? Is it normal, or is it because, and what are the risks really for menopausal women? And I guess I've always had this thought, and maybe you can help me sort this out. Women tend to live longer than men in general. And we are often the ones who, we go through menopause, we notice this increase in our cholesterol levels, in our LDLs. Why? If that's the case.
Why? Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
right. So women living longer, but yet sometimes because of the life changes we're going through, the blood chemistry isn't what it's, the normals are supposed to be. But is it really having an effect on us in a detrimental way?
And that's a really great question, because for many, many years we used to hear that, heart disease was a man's disease, because we weren't seeing the rates of heart disease in the 40s and 50s and even early 60s in women. And for a long time, I think we're starting to see those levels, come closer together the older people got. But we do know that estrogen is cardioprotective. It does protect our heart. Okay. That's not to say that we have a lot of evidence to date that says that hormone therapy given externally has the same effect. But if we're just talking about our own estrogen,
naturally produced estrogen in our body protects our heart.
That does have a cardioprotective effect. As we go through the menopause transition and those levels drop, there is a 10 to 20% increase in cholesterol, often as LDL, for women around that transition. And that is because estrogen levels drop. We have estrogen receptors in the liver. The liver is what produces our body's own cholesterol. For some people, that level normalizes a little bit. And so that's pretty much exactly what happened to me. Within a year of my period stopping, my cholesterol jumped, I think it was 13%. And then I went back 6 months later and it had come back down to 6% higher than it was before. That's kind of where it's hung out. So that is very much in line with what the research tells us. Now, cholesterol is one risk factor, and there are different types of cholesterol. You have to take family history into account and all these things. I do think it's important for women to not ignore it, because when we're looking at the risks, what matters is actually cholesterol years. How long has your cholesterol been high? So I think it can be a different conversation for, let's say, somebody who has familial high cholesterol and maybe has been borderline high for 10 years before menopause, and then all of a sudden it jumps. That's a different conversation. And so it really is just a data point. I know a lot of women worry about it because how could you not when you see this jump? But I think it's important to know that you can still make changes with diet and movement and lifestyle that can have an impact. But there probably isn't going to be 100% return on that investment because we have this convergence of other risk factors that are showing up at this stage of life, where we do have family history that might be coming into play. We have other, life things related to aging. But yeah, it is a very common thing for it to change around the last period.
Yeah. And I, happen dietitian also. So when I went to the doctor, they're checking my blood lipids after I had been, postmenopausal. And they're like, oh, yeah, we think we need to put you on a statin. And I said to the doctor, I said, why with the very first blip why wouldn't, there wasn't any discussion about any of the things related to what people can do with their diet. To see, maybe they could even reduce the amount of a statin someone might need to be on through diet. Not that they wouldn't have to take it at all. It really, and I think it's because I'm in the food business. Nutrition's my thing. Eating and cooking at home, and to automatically just be told that the medication was the answer, I did not believe that was true.
Yeah, and I think that. Sometimes the medical conversations do jump quickly to the pharmacological treatment.
Yes.
And I do think that sometimes people make assumptions about what people are doing based on their profession. And so maybe, your doctor assumed that because you're a dietitian, you were already doing all the things. But, we're all human. We can all learn.
Right.
And,
right.
when my cholesterol went up, the first thing I did was, okay, where are some opportunities for changing? That's when 100%. I doubled down on oatmeal.
Yeah.
And that's when difference. Oatmeal became, absolutely.
Right. Oatmeal, and then all the other things we've been talking about, soy foods. So this isn't to say, and everybody needs to hear me say this. This is not to say that I am against statins. That's not at all what I'm saying. But I believe that we can, and just like you in menopause with not tolerating the hormones as well, diet can be so valuable for working in certain things into what we eat, not going on a diet, but eating different foods for feeling better, for our overall health. Like I said, for our hair, for our nails, for our sleep, for our menopause symptoms, for our cholesterol levels, that are simple, easy things we can find every day in the supermarket. And that whole concept of food as medicine is not, it really is. I personally believe it's true. Yeah.
And it's funny because my background is also in naturopathic medicine, and for many, many years, and I actually talk about this a little bit in the book, the food as medicine philosophy was my ethos. I like to now think of them as different. So food is food and medicine is medicine. They both have a role to play, but I think sometimes we put too much pressure on food.
Well, there's probably some truth in that, yeah.
And we don't just let it be food.
And too many rules about it. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we need food, sometimes we need medicine, sometimes we need both. But yeah, that's an interesting concept that I've explored philosophically as my career has evolved. because I was seeing a lot of people who were coming in just putting so much pressure on themselves.
Yeah. Pressure on
You know,
themselves, pressure on what they eat, and pressure on medication. I think
yeah,
it's definitely a balancing act.
yeah,
And movement, you mentioned movement. I think regularly engaging in some sort of activity, walking is the simplest thing to do,
absolutely.
putting on your shoes and going out, regardless of the weather. I read a book or saw the title of a book once that said, there is no bad weather, just the wrong clothes.
Listen, I live in the Netherlands, so you are
Yes,
preaching to the choir.
100%.
Yeah, you learn to live with the rain. You
Right,
just do.
right. We went to Wales many years ago, and I just remember the clear umbrellas that were shaped like a dome that people could
Yeah.
see through, and baby buggies with a nice covering. Of course, it had air ventilation in it to keep the children dry. And people are
Yeah.
just out, doing their thing.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like a misty rain, maybe a little cool, but um, I think fresh air and movement. So that's part of the balancing act I do as well. But anyway, I just wanted to get your opinion about the cholesterol level. So, ladies, if you see a jump, just remember there are certain soluble fiber things like Jenn talked
Yeah.
about that are great ways to help perhaps reduce your need for a certain level of medication. You might be able to take a lesser amount. All right, I think we got one more ingredient, and that
Yep.
is omega-3
Omega-3s.
fats. Yep.
Yeah. So, and I think again, much like the other ingredients, omega-3 fats have been in the health sphere for a while. Most people have heard that fish is good for them, or, some people take supplements. And the patterns of eating that are rich in omega-3 fats are again the ones that are associated with healthier, longer lives. And, if we look at the Mediterranean pattern of eating, as I like to call it, one of its key core recommendations for both brain health and heart health and reduced inflammation is including these cold water fatty fish a few times a week. Now, not everybody loves fish. And so I think that acknowledging that is important. Not everybody also, I simply put, can afford fresh fish a few times a week in this day and age. So I like to encourage canned fish. I think it's a great option for people. And I talk about how, there are things that you can look for on the labels, certain certifications if you're concerned about where the fish is coming from. But we also have to remember that there are plant-based omega-3s that are not exactly the same as the kind that we get from fish, but the alpha linoleic acids that we get from nuts, in particular walnuts and flax seeds and chia seeds, they are also omega-3 fats. And there is a portion of them that can get converted to those active omega-3s. And so I like people to think about, what is your goal? If your goal is to increase your total omega-3 intake from foods, then you can do that with a variety of foods. It does not have to be fish. Fish is an easy, dense way to do it. And if you like fish, have at it. But also remember that the plant-based sources of omega-3s, they still count too.
Yeah, that's great. Excellent tips. And I love the fact that, canned fishes, and not only just like tuna or salmon, but sardines,
Sardines.
anchovies.
I'm,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
I'm the queen of
amazing canned
sardines.
fish. Right. Right. Yeah.
Queen of sardines. I love them. I have them at least once a week. Often right out of the can because
Yeah.
they're quick and easy and convenient, but I love them on like a rye bread with, hummus. I made a pesto the other day with pumpkin seeds, and they're really good on some crackers with that. They're just really flexible, easy, reasonably affordable compared to fresh fish. Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Yeah, there's a restaurant we go to live in northern Kentucky, outside of Cincinnati. It's in Cincinnati, and one of the appetizers on the menu is sardines with crackers and mustard.
Oh,
I know. And every time I go there, I get it. And I'm always shocked, first of all, that they still have it on the menu. I guess people must order it, but I think it's fascinating when a restaurant's willing to keep something like that on the menu, because I thought
yeah.
it was very unusual. It's a very simple thing to serve as an appetizer. And
Yeah.
I love getting stuff like that at restaurants, things that are different, and a little bit.
If I ever come to visit you, you'll have to take me there because
Yes,
I love
exactly.
seeing sardines on the menu.
Isn't that great? Yeah. And it's not the kind of restaurant you would think, like, you walk in, they maybe have a bar, they have some beer on tap, they'll have Guinness and things like that. But on the menu, you might find fish sandwich, Reuben sandwich, they have a homemade soup.
Love
They
it.
have some really good salads. But it's like a bar and grill, but they have sardines as an appetizer.
Amazing.
It is amazing. All right, so let's talk a little bit about now diving into the book. You obviously then were developing the recipes for this cookbook for midlife
Yeah.
women. And so you had a goal when you were developing the recipes
Yeah.
to have an endpoint for us to help us in the kitchen. So let's talk a little bit about the recipe development phase and some of the things that you included in the recipes to incorporate all of these 5 key ingredients.
Yeah, and it's interesting because some of these recipes were ones that I had actually had developed when probably 10 years ago when I was living in Canada. And so probably about half of them weren't new, but they were retested and zhuzhed up a little bit. But when I was looking at how do I fill in the gaps, one of the things that I always try and emphasize is that there is so much value in simplicity. And we're always sold these complicated solutions, programs, frameworks, algorithms, like all of these steps that you have to follow. And at the end of the day, we have to eat every day. We have to make decisions about food multiple times a day, often for other people. So I wanted recipes that would introduce people to some new things, right? But also weren't going to be requiring 2 hours of prep and cook time. So like I said, the simplicity of the recipes is a feature that, things that, yeah, you might have never heard of edamame before. Or maybe you've never heard of miso or nutritional yeast. But these are things that you can add to your kitchen, you can have in your fridge or your cupboard. They will last for a long time. And they're just great ways to add some new flavors, some nutrient density. But yeah, I really wanted these to be recipes that would work for not just individuals, but also for their families or other people that they might be cooking for or with.
Yeah, so you focus on the chapters of breakfast all day, nourishing soups and stews, midlife mains, salads and small plates, sweets and snacks, and then a chapter on cooling and comforting drinks.
Yeah.
When you think about women and which meals and which part of this book do you think has the potential to really change the way they think about incorporating these ingredients?
Oh, that's a great question. The meal that most women tell me that they're challenged with is lunches.
Yeah.
And I have lots of thoughts on that. But, a lot of the soups and stews that I have included are portable, freezable, include a main character protein in them. So, like the squash lentil soup, for example, or the tortilla soup. Because often if we're working at home or from home, it's still nice to have something that is already cooked and in the fridge that is also satisfying and filling, and that we're not just piecing together something out of the fridge in the cupboard. If you leave the house and go work somewhere else, it's also nice to be able to just take something that you've made the night before or on the weekend and have available. So, when I talk to women, a lot of that struggle is, I'm okay with breakfast and supper is fine because we're all eating together, but I tend to forget about lunch, or I don't eat enough at lunch to support my energy, or don't have a way to have that main character protein or fiber, etc. So I wanted to include lots of those soups and stews and salads that include a whole grain like quinoa, or that, include a chickpea or a bean or edamame, so that there were lots of these midday options available that are also portable.
That's great. Yeah. And I think you're right about that. I have heard people say they just forget to eat, or they are too busy to eat lunch in particular.
All the time.
Yeah. And I think it's a really great way if you have something ready to get those key ingredients in. So let's talk a little bit as we're wrapping up about writing your book and what it meant to actually take all of this knowledge that you have, years and years of experience, talking to women in midlife, cooking yourself, to package it in a book that you can now share with other people. Let's talk first about the writing of the book. And if you have any tips for anyone who might be listening who wants to embark on a journey of writing a book like this?
Well, I mean, so prior to writing this book, I had been working in the online space. I don't know if I hate the word influencer, but just, I was experienced with short form content creation. I had blogged, I had, written. I felt like had a lot of experience sharing my ideas. And I assumed that those were parallel or similar processes, but I very quickly learned that writing a book is a very different process. And so initially, I would just start writing. I had joined this online writing group on Monday mornings, and we would all show up on Zoom and then, kind of mute our cameras and we'd write together. And I thought it was like writing a caption for social media, like you start and you stop and it's done. But then I quickly realized that that's not how my thoughts were being organized. And so I ended up working in blocks. And so I would have research days, and then I would have writing days, and then I would have editing days. And that was a better flow for me. And I also found it challenging because half of my book isn't recipes. Half of my book is about what's happening in menopause. It's really that educational piece and giving kind of women the understanding of symptoms. That is a very different thing to write than recipe development and testing and writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I kind of came to was that I really needed to separate those two. So for a while in my head, I was writing two different books because trying to do them at the same time was too challenging for me mentally. So I would have manuscript weeks and I would have recipe weeks, and that worked better in terms of the flow. And then they had to come together. Thankfully, it all still made sense. But trying to do recipe and manuscript in one day, my brain just didn't compute it. So that was probably my biggest lesson learned, was that I had to kind of think of them separately.
Yeah, and I think those are great tips because often the manuscript weeks have to take place at a computer, and the recipe development weeks take place in your kitchen, and it's two completely different locations and ways of thinking. But it looks to me like everything did come together beautifully. I'm sure you're very proud of it. What did you do in order to get the book published then?
Well, so I worked with an agent, and the agent was really great at helping to connect me with a publisher who she thought would be a good fit, and thankfully that worked out really well. And so I once my proposal was accepted and started writing it, it was actually closer to 18 months from writing to pub date. And part of that is at food photography and just layout and design and all that kind of stuff. But it's a lot longer than I thought it would. I thought it was, once I start writing and I get it done, then it just kind of shows up on the shelf. But it's a much longer process than I thought.
Yeah. And there's, I think, advantages and disadvantages to that. What's life like for Jenn now that she's an author?
Oh gosh. Well, it feels like Christmas Day every time that I get an email or somebody, shares on social media a recipe that they made. So I'm still my book is still very new. It just came out on October 21st. So we're still in the honeymoon stage of, I'm just so glad that it's here and that it, turned out the way it did, and loving all the feedback that I'm getting. So, so life is pretty good right now.
Good. That's great. And it's a new year, and people are thinking about, like they think of a year as a blank slate ahead of them. What do you recommend as we're closing for women who are in midlife and in menopause related to 2026?
Well, resist the urge to change everything in January. I know we all feel like, it's a fresh start, but making those New Year's resolutions doesn't usually work out the way that we want them to. I like to think of making non-diet resolutions. So if you want to work on changing a behavior, if you want to work on changing something, and by non-diet, I mean non-dieting, I don't mean non-food. But I invite people to join me for a non-diet resolution every January, where you can work on what you can add in, maybe work on the behavior of eating, something that will help you feel more at home and at peace in your midlife body.
That's great. And if they're interested in joining you, how do they connect with you online?
The best way to connect with me is Instagram, where I'm at menopause.nutritionist, or on my website, which is menopausenutritionist.ca.
Okay, great. I'll link to those in the show notes. Well, Jenn, happy 2026. So thankful that you put this book together, and now women have a nice package where they can turn to your expertise, not only about the ingredients themselves, but about how to turn them into delicious foods that they can eat and share with their family. I'm sure families enjoy these things as well if they still have someone they're feeding, or if they don't.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, Maggie. It was
You're
lovely to
welcome.
chat.
Yeah, have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. Again, all the links can be found in the show notes at www.cookbooklove.co. And if you are interested in writing a cookbook of your own, please check out the free cookbook writing masterclass called How to Get Paid to Write a Cookbook. It is designed specifically for food or nutrition experts, and you can check that out at www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/free. So that's it for today's episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. This is your host, Maggie Green. And until next time, have a great day and keep loving your cookbooks.
Thanks for listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast. You can find out more information at www.cookbooklove.co.